Welcome back to our channel. In 1981, the United States Mint was churning out coins at full capacity. It was a year bustling with change, not just in economics, but in policy and technology. Ronald Reagan was set to take office, inflation hovered ominously, and the country was navigating a turbulent economic landscape. Amid this climate, coins were produced by the billions, including the unassuming 1981 Roosevelt Dime. With the same core composition used since 1965, outer layers of copper-nickel bonded to an inner copper core, it was never expected to stand out. Just another dime among millions, bearing the familiar profile of Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse, torch and olive branches on the reverse. The Mint, as always, operated under pressure, demand, deadlines, and relentless repetition. Yet, even the most carefully orchestrated machines are not immune to imperfection. Somewhere between the ceaseless clicks of the presses and the silent fall of blank planchets, something went awry. It wasn't a mechanical failure that brought everything to a screeching halt. This was quieter, subtler. A small anomaly in a sea of precision. And it didn't raise alarms. It passed through unnoticed, tucked within rolls and bags shipped across the nation. For most, it was just another dime. But for those who watch closely for the rare breed of collector who sees not just metal, but meaning, it was something entirely different. Andrew Callahan had been collecting coins since the late 60s. It started as a hobby with his grandfather, sifting through spare change, setting aside wheat pennies, silver quarters, or nickels. Over the years, Andrew developed an instinct for the extraordinary. In 1987, long after the coin had entered circulation, he came across a roll of dimes from a local flea market in Missouri. Nothing flashy, just a crinkled paper wrapper, the kind often rolled by banks or bored retirees. He wasn't expecting much. At best, maybe a full-band Roosevelt or a proof-like surface. What he found, instead, was a dime that didn't belong. It felt strange in his hand, lighter, almost tinny in the way it rang when dropped. He noticed, too, that its edge seemed slightly off, less defined. When he held it up to the light, the reading on the edge was faint, as though it had melted into the coin's circumference. Under magnification, the details deepened. The coin lacked the standard copper-colored edge. Instead, it had a silvery hue throughout, startlingly uniform. That was when the realization began to sink in. This dime wasn't struck on the usual copper nickel-clad planchet. Somehow, impossibly, it had been struck on a planchet meant for a foreign coin. Andrew's hands trembled. He weighed it. 2.2 grams. Slightly under the normal weight for a Roosevelt dime, which should have been 2.27 grams. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't wear. This was a wrong planchet error. But not just any wrong planchet, it was suspected to be a Mexican 1 peso blank, a rare mismatch. The Roosevelt design, struck cleanly on foreign metal, created a surreal blend of U.S. imagery on international alloy. The precision of the Mint, disrupted by a slip that allowed a blank from another nation to make its way into the U.S. striking chamber. For months, Andrew obsessed. He contacted experts, weighed comparisons, even visited a regional coin show to ask for opinions. Most were stunned. A few were skeptical. But when he submitted it to a third-party grading service, the response was conclusive. Genuine U.S. Roosevelt dime struck on a foreign planchet. It was slabbed and designated as a Mint error. Mint State 63, silver-grade luster, razor-sharp details. A freak of chance preserved in metal. Back then, error collecting was still a niche within a niche. The coin sold quietly in 1988 for $350, a staggering price for a dime, yet modest in hindsight. But it left a trail. Collectors remembered it. Dealers whispered about it. And slowly, a legend grew. By the mid-1990s, more examples began to surface, just a handful. All from the same year. All with the same peculiar traits. No copper core. Reduced weight. Weak edge reading. And all dated 1981. Some bore the P mint mark, others the D. It suggested a broader issue, a batch of incorrect planchets mingled with domestic blanks, likely during cross-border metal shipments. The scope of the error was larger than anyone had guessed, but still small enough to remain rare. Estimates suggested fewer than 24 escaped the mint. Values crept upward. In 1996, one sold for $780. A decade later, another fetched $100. Yet each sale was cloaked in uncertainty. There were no concrete records, no official acknowledgement from the mint. Each coin's journey was undocumented, its existence an accident history never intended. That mystery fed its value. And then, in 2009, something changed. At an estate auction in Tucson, a collector's hoard was liquidated. Among the proof sets, mint rolls, and gold commemoratives, a coin dealer spotted a dime unlike the others. It had the hallmarks of the 1981 wrong planchet error, but there was something more. The surface shimmered not with silver tones, but with a golden hue. At first, it was dismissed as toning or environmental damage. But metallurgical analysis revealed a shock. The coin had been struck on a brass-clad blank, most likely from a Philippine 25 centimos planchet used for U.S.-struck coins intended for overseas use. The coin was authenticated. The anomaly wasn't just in composition. The reverse, under high magnification, displayed slight die rotation about 35 degrees clockwise. Combined with the wrong metal, the result was a compound error, incorrect planchet, die rotation, and subtle weakness in the strike around Roosevelt's neck. It was, in every sense, a unicorn. That coin sold privately in 2011 for $9,000. And just like that, the stakes changed. Collectors who had overlooked 1981 dimes before began reevaluating their stashes. Error specialists began publishing articles, examining diagnostics, comparing die states. Theories proliferated. Some believed a small batch of foreign planchets had been mistakenly used at both the Philadelphia and Denver mints, possibly due to shared storage or transport facilities during a time of material shortage. Others speculated that leftover blanks from U.S. overseas contract minting had been funneled into domestic production to reduce waste. Whatever the cause, the 1981 dime now had a narrative of entry. In 2016, one of the original silver-toned foreign planchet dimes, previously graded MS-64, went up for auction again. It sold for $4,800, a steep climb from its earlier days. More collectors joined the hunt, and competition stiffened. But new finds remained elusive. The total confirmed population hovered around 15. With each passing year, that number seemed more final. In 2021, another twist emerged. A young numismatist named Clara Medina, attending her first coin show in New York, purchased a lot of bulk coins from a clearance table, mostly clad change, pulled from circulation. Among them, she found what appeared to be an ordinary 1981 dime. But Clara had an eye. She noticed that Roosevelt's profile looked unusually soft, not worn, but somehow shallow. When she tilted the coin, she spotted faint doubling on "In God We Trust," and even more pronounced ghosting behind the date. She consulted an expert, who initially thought it might be mechanical doubling. But further study revealed it was genuine hub doubling. A 1981 Roosevelt dime with a double die obverse, never previously documented. Its rarity was compounded by its pairing with a possible misaligned die strike. This wasn't just an error dime. It was a new discovery, altering what numismatists believed possible for that year. The coin's value wasn't just in its mistake, it was in its power to rewrite the record. Clara's find was certified, labeled as the first of its kind, and sent shockwaves through the collecting world. Offers came in immediately. The highest? $15,000. She declined. To this day, that dime hasn't changed hands. Clara keeps it in a velvet-lined case, not for its value, but for what it represents. A reminder that even in a time when machines govern precision, the unpredictable still finds a way to break through. The 1981 Roosevelt dime was never meant to be a story, but it became one. Through the hands of collectors, the quiet corners of auctions, and the rarest flukes of minting history, it defied expectations. Some were lighter, others golden, and a few bore phantom images no one expected to find. And in that unpredictability, they found their value, not just in dollars, but in fascination, in the chase, in the belief that something ordinary might just be hiding something extraordinary. Somewhere in a drawer or a forgotten change jar, another might be waiting. A dime worth more than its face, more than its metal worth the wonder it sparks the moment it's seen for what it truly is. In 1990, the United States Mint operated with the confidence of a well-oiled machine. Billions of coins passed through its presses annually, rolling off in near-perfect uniformity, their designs unchanged for decades. Among these was the humble Roosevelt Dime, a small silver-colored coin that had, since 1946, featured the resolute profile of President Franklin D. Roosevelt on its obverse and a torch flanked by an olive branch and oak branch on the reverse. There was little fanfare about the 1990 production. No commemorative shifts, no major redesigns, just another year in the long legacy of American coinage. Or so it seemed. The Denver and Philadelphia mints dutifully struck the dimes, as they had done countless times before. Each coin was expected to bear the mark of its origin, a small letter just above the date, either a D for Denver or a P for Philadelphia. These marks were more than mere symbols. They were identifiers, essential to understanding where a coin came from, especially in a hobby as meticulous as numismatics. And yet, amidst the millions of coins struck that year, something inexplicable happened. It wasn't dramatic. There was no dramatic misstrike or off-center press. In fact, the flaw was nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. A subtle absence. The kind of detail so easily overlooked that its presence, or in this case, absence, only mattered to those who truly paid attention. Years passed. These dimes filtered quietly into pockets, piggy banks, and soda machines, their secret concealed in plain sight. The public never paused to inspect the date or mint mark of their change. But one collector, an amateur with a passion for small details and a magnifying loupe never far from reach, had a habit of scanning every dime he received. It was a Saturday morning, and the collector, his name was Allen, was sorting through his latest batch of circulated coins. He'd made it a weekly ritual, more meditative than methodical, more hope than expectation. The silver glint of a dime caught his eye, and he flipped it over as he had done thousands of times before. 1990. He squinted closer. No mint mark. That wasn't uncommon. Philadelphia coins, especially older ones, often lacked them. But then something tickled at the edge of his memory. He pulled out his coin catalog. For years after 1980, all dimes struck for circulation were supposed to include a mint mark, Philadelphia included. The exception was proof coins, struck in San Francisco. Those two had mint marks in S. Yet here was a 1990 dime with none at all. Allen's pulse quickened. Was it a worn die? Perhaps the mint mark had been obliterated through heavy use? He examined the coin under magnification. The area where the mint mark should have been was smooth, untouched not by time, but by design. There was no evidence that a mark had ever been there. It was as though the die used to strike this coin had never been engraved with a mint mark to begin with. This wasn't just rare. It was a ghost. A phantom error that defied normal explanations. Allen began researching. What he uncovered astonished him. There were whispers in collector forums, barely acknowledged listings in obscure newsletters, and a few incomplete mentions in early 90s coin publications. Others had found similar dimes, 1990 coins without a mint mark, but none knew how many existed, or why. Some speculated that a proof die had somehow made its way into the production line for circulation coins. Others thought it might be a master die error, something overlooked during the engraving phase. No one agreed. No one could say for certain, but the implications were huge. The U.S. Mint prided itself on precision. Mistakes happened, yes, but this kind of oversight, especially so late in the century, was exceedingly rare. Allen submitted the dime for authentication. Weeks passed. Then, The result came back genuine. A 1990 Roosevelt Dime, struck without a mint mark. Confirmed error. He wasn't the only one. Slowly, more collectors reported similar finds. Not thousands. Not hundreds. Dozens. Maybe fewer. The exact number has never been confirmed. What was once dismissed as a fluke became a subject of intense speculation. Was this the result of a rogue die mint for a proof set? Or perhaps a transitional oversight, when the die engraver failed to apply the mint mark punch during preparation? Whatever the reason, the error was real and it was rare. The market, however, was slow to catch up. At first, these dimes traded for modest premiums. A few dollars above face value. Then tens. Then hundreds. But still, many remained skeptical. The Roosevelt Dime, after all, was not a popular series for high-end collectors. It was practical, often overlooked, until one surfaced at auction. It was a crisp example, near uncirculated. The bidding started low, almost insultingly so. But then momentum. The crowd, a mix of in-person bidders and online watchers, began to buzz. The price climbed. $100. $500. $1000. Whispers turned to gasps. When the final hammer fell, the coin had fetched a sum that made headlines in numismatic circles. $2 185 for a dime. A single tiny dime. 10 cents transformed into thousands. Collectors reevaluated. Dealers scoured their inventory. Coin roll hunters redoubled their efforts. The 1990 no-mint mark dime became a legend. Not as iconic as the 1913 Liberty Head nickel, not as dramatic as the 1955 double die penny, but it had its own quiet mythology. A coin that shouldn't exist. A mistake born not of chaos, but of silence. What made the coin especially fascinating wasn't just its value or rarity, it was its appearance. Or rather, what it lacked. That tiny mint mark, barely larger than a pinhead, became the coin's defining trait by its absence. It turned out that the San Francisco Mint had mistakenly used a proof die without a mint mark to strike a small batch of circulation coins. Proof dies were never meant for regular coinage. They were polished, precise, crafted for collectors. That one had found its way into the general production process was as improbable as it was historic. But the twist hadn't arrived. In 2008, a researcher combing through Mint archives stumbled upon an internal memo from 1990. The memo, dusty and misfiled, referenced a batch of proof dies returned to San Francisco due to incomplete engraving. Among them, a Roosevelt Dime die with no mint mark. The document noted a request for destruction of the die, but there was no confirmation it had been scrapped. This raised a question no one had considered before. What if the error wasn't accidental? Some theorized that a mint employee, knowing the die lacked a mint mark, had intentionally allowed it into the production line. Not for sabotage, but perhaps as an insider's way of creating a rarity, something to leave behind. It wasn't provable. There was no name, no confession. Only a memo, a missing die, and a handful of dimes scattered across America's pockets. That possibility sent chills through the collector community. If true, it changed everything. The 1990 no-mint mark dime wasn't just a production mistake, it might have been a whispered act of rebellion or pride. A footnote in history left by hands who knew their work would never bear their name. The coin's value continued to evolve. Today, its worth depends on condition, demand, and the mystery surrounding it. Circulated examples might fetch several $100s. Uncirculated ones, especially those graded and slabbed by reputable services, can command thousands. But for collectors like Alan, the coin's monetary value is only part of the story. It's about the search, the surprise, and the shadowy trail of clues that led to one of the most intriguing numismatic puzzles of the late 20th century. And somewhere, perhaps still sitting unnoticed in a cash register drawer or buried in a forgotten change jar, another 1990 no-mint mark dime waits. Silent, shining, and rare. a tiny anomaly holding a tale worth far more than its silver sheen suggests. In the stillness of 2004, amid a world shifting through digital revolutions and geopolitical tremors, the Philadelphia Mint carried on with its timeless ritual, churning out coins in the millions. Day in and day out, Roosevelt Dimes clinked into sorting bins, small and silvery echoes of economic continuity. The 2004 one-dime coin seemed no different. It bore the familiar features: President Franklin D. Roosevelt's solemn profile on the obverse, torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse, and the characteristic copper-nickel sheen. But somewhere in that sea of sameness, something broke the pattern, quietly, irrevocably. This wasn't an error that shouted for attention. It whispered instead, subtle in its defiance of the expected. It began at the die, a simple flaw in the intricate machinery. A misalignment here, a slightly deteriorated die there. Not a dramatic double strike, not a bold off-center. Just the kind of anomaly that escaped the eyes of the tired inspector, lulled by routine. Yet in time, that oversight would come to haunt or perhaps bless the numismatic world. Years passed before the first whisper became a name. Not in the bustling marketplace or at a national auction, but in the quiet basement of a modest two-story home in Akron, Ohio. Harold Fisher, a retired high school chemistry teacher turned part-time coin collector, hunched over his magnifying loupe. He had been organizing his recent finds from a local bank roll, a dull task on most days, soothing in its predictability. But on this evening, something struck him: a Roosevelt dime with an unusual shimmer under the glass. Harold blinked, tilted the coin. The rim seemed slightly misshapen. The design wasn't crisp. There was something off about the spacing of the lettering, the motto, "In God We Trust," seeming slightly squashed, uncomfortably close to the rim. At first, he thought it was post-mint damage. But the edges were clean. No scrape marks. No signs of circulation abuse. The torch on the reverse? It seemed elongated, warped almost. His heart, once accustomed to calm calculation and beaker measurements, began to beat faster. He wasn't looking at a damaged coin. He was looking at something the mint never meant to release. Research became obsession. Harold spent weeks poring over coin forums, contacting fellow collectors, emailing numismatic societies. He wasn't alone. A few others had noted anomalies in the 2004 dime series. Not many, and none willing to call it significant yet. But Harold pressed on. The error, he deduced, came from a misaligned die paired with a weak strike, creating a shallow and slightly rotated design that affected both obverse and reverse. On some specimens, the clad layer on one side appeared to have a slight lamination peel, though not enough to render it dramatic. It was the kind of error that sat uneasily between categories, too subtle for casual collectors, too intriguing for seasoned ones to ignore. By 2009, whispers turned to murmurs. A few specimens surfaced on eBay tagged as 2004 Roosevelt Dime die strike anomaly rare. Prices fluctuated. One sold for $12. Another went unnoticed at $4. Then came the oddity: a listing that closed at $89. No explanation. No provenance. Just one eager bidder who saw what others hadn't. A New York dealer picked up the trail in 2011. With years in the trade, he had a keen eye for undervalued pieces. He featured one of the error dimes in a local expo with little fanfare, but a sharp-eyed collector from Arizona took interest and, in hushed tones, asked to see other examples. A network began to form. Collectors began exchanging photos, measurements, spectral analyses. A theory took shape. The error only occurred in a narrow run from the Philadelphia Mint, likely due to a damaged working die that was used beyond its recommended lifespan. The Mint never confirmed this. They didn't have to. The evidence was etched in nickel. By 2014, the coin's market had formed its own niche. Only those who knew the science sought it. The warped lettering, slightly weak reverse, occasional partial color strike, and in rarer cases, a rotation error between obverse and reverse. The scarcity made it appealing. the subtlety seductive. It was a collector's coin, not flashy, but whispering a challenge to those who could read its secrets. Then came the twist. In 2017, at a modest coin convention in Des Moines, Iowa, a dealer unpacking his inventory found something peculiar. A 2004 dime error, like the others, but this one bore a reverse die that had a curious texture, almost as if the coin had been struck through cloth. The fine pattern ran horizontally across the torch and branches. Closer inspection revealed it was not a post-mint alteration. Under microscopy, the textile impression was beneath the final layer, indicating it had happened during the minting process itself. This was no ordinary error. This was a strike-through, and likely from a fragment of glove or wiping cloth caught between the die and the planchet. News spread quickly. The coin community erupted in speculation. Was this an isolated strike-through, or part of a larger, undocumented incident at the mint? Had a maintenance lapse created a flurry of unique anomalies? Suddenly, the 2004 dime was not just a coin with one odd error, it was a potential treasure map of overlooked minting chaos. Enthusiasts returned to their collections. Dealers re-examined their inventories. What had once been a curiosity was now something of a legend. The market reacted. Prices climbed, cautiously at first. A standard error sold for $200 in late 2017. By 2019, near-pristine examples approached $500. The strike-through specimen from Des Moines fetched $1,750 at a private auction, its buyer insisting on anonymity. A rumor floated that a second example had been found in Georgia, though no photos ever surfaced. By the time the pandemic swept the world in 2020, numismatics saw a renewed boom. Hobbyists turned inward, rediscovering old albums, unsearched rolls. And amid that resurgence, the 2004 dime error found new life. Younger collectors, raised on stories of million-dollar pennies and rare quarters, began hunting for it with a kind of reverent obsession. Every detail was scrutinized. Was the rim slightly swollen? Did the torch's flame curl unnaturally? Was the date shifted left by a millimeter? Each find ignited hope. Each hopeful added fuel to the myth. Then, in 2023, came the letter. An anonymous tipster sent a parcel to the American Numismatic Association. Inside was a 2004 Roosevelt Dime with two astounding features: a rotation of nearly 180 degrees between obverse and reverse, and a stark, full cut at 9 o'clock on the obverse rim. The cut, caused by a die break, was large, clean, unmistakable. And the rotation? A perfect alignment inversion. This was a minting disaster caught in metal. The coin had not seen circulation. It was mint state, mirror sharp, and radiated that eerie sense of having waited silently, knowing its day would come. It was appraised quietly. Estimates varied wildly. Some whispered $8,000. Others dared higher. But the coin never went to public auction. Instead, it was traded in a private deal between two high-profile collectors. The final price? Shrouded. But insiders suggested a six-figure tag wasn't out of the question. With that, the legend was sealed. Now, the 2004 Roosevelt Dime error has become a kind of holy grail, not for its flashiness or dramatic appearance, but because it represents the perfect storm of subtlety, scarcity, and escalating intrigue. It's a coin that challenges even seasoned collectors to look harder, to pay attention, to chase whispers in a world grown noisy. And still they surface. Slowly. Quietly. A kid finds one in a drawer. A grandmother discovers it tucked in a keepsake box. A dealer, long blind to its tale, rediscovers its rarity. Each one reigniting the old thrill, the sharp breath before recognition. Each one a whisper from a time when the mint made a mistake, one the world wouldn't notice until a retired teacher, with a loop and patience, decided to listen. An bell rang when it was made. No announcement was issued. Just a flaw in the steel and a sliver of time. But that dime, that unassuming 2004 Roosevelt Dime, has now become something more. a symbol of what lies beneath the surface, waiting for those brave or curious enough to look beyond the obvious. And somewhere, perhaps, another waits silent, flawless, and heavy with the weight of its secret.